Welcome to the Invest for More Real Estate Podcast. My name is Mark Ferguson, and I am your host. I'm a house flipper. I flip 10 to 15 houses a year. I own 13 rental properties with a goal to buy 100 by 2023. I'm also a real estate agent. I've been licensed since '01. I run a team of 9. We sell close to 200 houses a year. So on this show, we like to interview house flippers, landlords, and the best real estate agents in the business. So stay tuned for some great shows. If you want more information on my rentals, on the numbers, how I buy properties, check out InvestFourMore.com. Hey everyone, it's Mark Ferguson with Invest for More, and welcome to another podcast on the Invest for More Real Estate Show. Today, I've got a very cool guest, Dr. Matt Motil, who has a Cash Flow King podcast, is focusing on buy and hold investing right now, has done wholesaling, does a lot of seller financing, very active in the real estate world. So I'm excited to talk to Matt, see what he's got going on, and see what we can learn from him. So Matt, how are you doing today?
Good, Mark. Thanks for having me on the show.
Yeah, no, I appreciate it. I always start everybody out with kind of how you first got started in real estate. I know you have a construction background. Were you always interested in real estate, or that come later in life? How did that all come about?
No, it was relatively early. My dad was in construction, and so we kind of bounced around project to project. He would chase the big jobs across the country kind of a thing. And so we moved a lot. And so the idea of being a little nomadic was just kind of how we were raised. And when I went to college, I read Rich Dad, Poor Dad. I was probably about 19 when I read that book. I kind of say that that's the gateway drug to real estate investing for a lot of people, even though it's not necessarily a real estate investing book per se. That was the kind of the red pill that opened my eyes, that I was like, wow, there's a whole different world in terms of wealth creation and, that kind of thing that I really hadn't been exposed to up to that point. And I really started getting my hands on any information I could get after that about what it would take to get into the real estate game somehow, and as much information as I could. And that, as a 19-year-old kid, it's like, what's legit and what's not. I really didn't have a lot of money, so I wasn't in a position to buy a bunch of programs or, take somebody's course or things of that nature. And so I just kind of absorbed all the free content I could. Started doing property management when I was 20, just kind of fell into it. My parents bought a house, they moved away, and my brother and I moved into it as kind of a rental, and we moved fraternity brothers into it as like a college rental property. It was right off campus in Toledo, Ohio. And later on, I would look back at that and be like, wow, I was basically just managing that rental property. And then pretty soon, right after I graduated from college, I bought my first house and started flipping houses. This was in the early 2000s, and then got into rentals right around the time the market crashed, kind of out of necessity. In 2015, was able to quit the construction industry full-time and go into real estate full-time, use it on the backbone of my rentals.
Cool. As far as your construction, you were a union laborer, right? Did you start that right after college? Is that what your career was at that time?
So I joined the labor union right out of high school. So when I was 18, I joined the labor union, Local 500 in Toledo, Ohio, and I was working on some bridge projects. That was really kind of what motivated me to go to college, because I saw these guys I was working with that were just busted and broken and, very cynical. And I was like, man, I don't know that I can do this for the rest of my life. And I was already accepted to school, but it was kind of one of those things, because a lot of the guys that were on the crew were people that had gone to school, and they were making so much money in the trades that they had never, they had quit to just pursue a career in the trades. And so for me as an 18-year-old, I was like, okay, do I go to school? Do I get a degree? Do I, stay out here in the workforce? Because at the time, I want to say, this would have been in the late 90s, I want to say minimum wage was still under $6 an hour. And here I was making, I think my wage as a union laborer was like $19.80 an hour. And so I'd never made more money in my life. It was very tempting to say, okay, maybe I'll just do this and make a career out of it, or at least for a little while. But ultimately made the decision to go to school. I was accepted to school for engineering, and eventually finished an engineering degree, and then entered the workforce as an engineer, and then kind of worked my way back into construction about a year after I graduated from school as a project engineer working on the management side of big construction projects.
Wow. Okay. So you've been all over the place for construction.
Yeah.
I had, I've done a little bit of construction in my life, but how much do you think that helped you as far as real estate, having that construction background?
I think from a standpoint of if you want to be a real estate investor, then you need to have someone in your team, whether it's you or it's somebody else, that really understands the rehab side. And, growing up in construction, having that background, even though I might not necessarily know all the ins and outs of everything involved with all the little parts and pieces of stuff, you have a very good understanding of how much work can somebody do in a shift or in like a day, and being able to put estimates together and things of that nature is, it's priceless. So like I said, is this something that you personally need to be able to do? No, not necessarily, but somebody's got to be able to do it if you want to be successful in the investment space. Because, it doesn't matter whether you're flipping houses or you're looking at rentals or you're looking at wholesaling. Nothing really comes to you as an investor, quote unquote, turnkey, right? We always have to put something into it. And your ability to figure that out and then manage that process is really crucial. So for me personally, I think it was huge, on the one side, because I can go into any property and, in 20 minutes, I have an estimate that's, plus or minus a couple $100, a couple $1,000 of where other contractors are going to be when they go in to price it up. And so I think that makes me pretty competitive when I know my numbers really well. On the other side, when I was first starting out, because I had some handyman skills and I had, the general knowledge of stuff, I did way more work myself than I should have. And it took me a long time because I'm kind of stubborn. So it took me a long time to get over that and be like, hey, your time's better spent not swinging the hammer or pushing the broom or slinging the paintbrush. But, for me personally, that was my thing. I think that helped me to say, hey, let's take the leap, because it was like, oh, I know how to do all this. So it won't be that big of a deal. And then when you first start out and you don't have any money, your labor is free if you want it to be. So
right.
I think it helped me get in the game.
No, that's really interesting. When I was, probably back in 2006, I decided the best thing I could do was flip a house myself, meaning do all the rehab myself. And it was the biggest mistake I ever made in my life. Like, it was just miserable. I was there for 6 months replacing windows, doors, kitchens, baths, and I didn't have the experience you had to do it either. So the work wasn't as good. And I learned, yes, from there on, it's nice to have that understanding and background of what it takes to fix a house, but I don't ever want to do it again. That's for sure. And my time is spent so much better managing things than actually doing the work.
Yeah. Well, and and the thing is too, what I learned the hard way too is like you go in with that attitude of, oh, I got this, and then you realize pretty quickly, oh, I just screwed that up. Okay, let me hire the professional and bring them in, and then when they come in, they're you play that game of like, oh my God, who did that? And you go, I don't know, it was like this when I bought it, or whatever, and and then it costs you like 2 or 3 times what it would have cost you had you just hired the right guy to begin with. But the good and bad of that is, like I say this all the time, that's like paying the tuition to the school of hard knocks, right? And the only way to learn is to get that experience. And sometimes that tuition's expensive, and it is what it is. But yeah, it's kind of funny. I've gotten to the point now where I know my limitations well enough to say, all right, and more as I realize how much value my time has, I do less and less.
Right. Yep. Same here. And I'm still glad I did that, but it taught me a lot about what not to do in my business too. Sure. But definitely learn a lot from some of the biggest mistakes you make in life. And like you said, sometimes it costs money, but usually in the end, it's worth it if you can learn from them and not, just leave the business altogether. Very cool. So I liked what you said too about knowing how to estimate costs and work with contractors, because that's one thing I see too with a lot of people is they come into the industry and maybe they hire the first general contractor they find and they're charging them, $80, $100 an hour for work. And in this business, you can't make money hiring the most expensive guys who are working with homeowners, doing basement remodels where people don't know what things should cost. And one of the biggest advantages I think I have and others who have been in the business a long time is finding those affordable contractors, making sure they're doing what they're supposed to be doing, keeping them in check. And it sounds like that's something that you really value in your business as well.
Yeah, for sure. I mean, anybody can sell you a $50,000 kitchen, right? I want the guy that's going to sell me a $7,000 kitchen that looks like a $50,000 kitchen, and he's happy about it, right? Because I'm going to keep him busy and that kind of thing.
Yep, exactly. Cool. So when you said you got out of college, you started flipping houses right away. How did that go? I mean, were you successful flipping from the get-go? Did you have some hiccups? How was the flips?
I did it, it was funny because I did it really as like a side hustle. I was, my primary focus was always on my career as an engineer. And, because that was really how I was raised, was like that, you went to school, you paid a lot of money, you got this fancy piece of paper on the wall. That's what you should be doing. That's your main focus. Like, that's your job. And so I didn't have a lot of money, and my parents really pushed me. So when I got out of school, I was traveling around the world as a field engineer in the heat treating industry. So my degree was actually in mechanical engineering. So I was doing like heat treating of steel as a field engineer. So I would travel to sites and I would set up equipment and I would test equipment and all that kind of stuff. And, as a young single guy, like, that's cool because the company's paying you decent money, and you really, when you're on the road, you don't spend a dime. And, but the problem was I never knew when I was leaving, never knew when I was coming home. But my bank account was getting really big, but I was never home to even spend any of my money. So it was like this weird thing. And eventually, about a year in, I was like, you know what? I just want to sleep in my own bed. I just want to be able to make plans with my friends. Because people would ask you, hey, 2 weeks from now, we're going to go out and do this. You want to go? And you'd be like, well, I don't know. I don't know if I'll be in town. And it was okay in the beginning, but after a while, it was like, okay, you guys aren't paying me enough for me to basically have sold my entire life to the company, especially at like 21, 22 years old. And so when I transitioned from that career back into construction as an engineer, I really wanted to, be home every night and do that whole thing. And so I didn't have a whole lot of money saved up to where I could just, go in and start a side business. So what I did was I realized if I bought a house FHA, I only have to put 3.5% down. I think I bought my first house for like $2,200, I think it was. And then the lender credits even paid a little bit of my closing costs, even though I don't think they can even technically do that these days. But this was, pre Frank Dodd and RESPA and TRID and all that kind of stuff. So I think I wrote a check for like $1,800, and I bought my first house. It was in suburbs of St. Louis, and it needed work, but I needed a place to live. And so I did what, I think a lot of people in the industry call live and flip. And so I live and flipped a bunch of houses. It was where I would buy it, I'd actually live there, and then nights and weekends, that was my hobby because I needed something to do anyway. So I would just work on the house, repaint, new flooring, kitchens, baths. I'd just do it all. And then when it was done, it was like, all right, I'm bored. Let's sell it, move on to the next one. And realized after I did the first one, I kind of fell into it because I really didn't intend to flip it. It just kind of worked out that way because right when I got the work done, I was transferred from St. Louis to Phoenix. And so I put my house on the market, and the realtor came in and was like, well, I think you can get this much for it. I was like, really? Like, I only owned it for like 4 months. She goes, yeah, but it's beautiful and all this work's been done and blah, blah, blah. And I was like, wow, awesome. And then I took all that money and rolled it into the first house I bought in Phoenix and just kind of did it all over again. Just kept doing that, rode the market all the way up to the tippy top in Phoenix, and then watched it completely fall apart and lost everything when the market crashed. That was painful because that was that market still hasn't recovered from where it was in 2006, 2007. So kind of sad. But that was kind of how I got into flipping, was I would just live in something and do all the work. And, and YouTube wasn't what it is today back then. But it was like, oh, I want to rip out this or redo this. And it was like, oh, I could find a video online for that. That'll give me a rough idea of what I'm doing. And I would just, get home from work and open a beer and start swinging a hammer.
Nice. Well, yeah, that is kind of unlucky that you got transferred to Phoenix because, like you said, that was one of, if not the hardest hit areas in the crash. And yeah, if you would have been transferred to, or stayed in St. Louis, you probably would have been fine. You would have had some crash, but nothing.
Yeah, we would have had a softening. That market just didn't get. But Phoenix got hammered, and then that was my first attempt at being a landlord because so the market had peaked, and we sold a house literally right at the peak of the market. And had I known what was going on, I wouldn't have. I would have rented, right? Hindsight's 20/20. So if I would have known better, I would have taken that money, and because at that point, I think I had probably like $180, almost $200,000 in equity that I had just made on a house, and because the market was insane out there, it was literally going vertical, and I rolled it all into a new build construction because we were going to set up roots and we were going to have kids and blah 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 blah. Yeah, and just at the peak of the market, my house was worth about $600K, and when it bottomed out, houses next door to me were selling for $175, $180, and I had already moved back to Cleveland at this point. I'd moved back to Ohio, and we had 2 mortgages, and we had attempted to rent the house out in Phoenix, and then our tenant had moved out and not told us, and we weren't getting any rent now. And at that point in time, we tried to get an agent to help us rent it again. And our agent was like, hey, Matt, I don't know how to break it to you, but like there's almost 80,000 vacant homes in the valley right now. And I was like, you got to be kidding me. He goes, yeah, like people know that there's this many vacant homes. So you'll get a renter, but they're really not going to pay you anything. They'll tell you, hey, we'll live in your house so that nobody breaks in and steals all your stuff. But we don't really want to pay you anything to live there. So it was totally a renter, market from the standpoint that people were offering you like $300-400 for a 3,000 square foot house. We couldn't afford that, obviously. So we did a deed in lieu of foreclosure, and that hurt. But, time heals all wounds in those types of scenarios, and it is what it is. The painful thing was the equity loss. We rolled, like I said, probably about $200,000 into the down payment of that property because nobody was telling me not to do that. I would never do that again, especially knowing what happened after we, had signed and moved in and we saw the market then take a turn. We realized that we had really made a bad decision. The good thing is, and this is, what I tell people all the time is like, especially when people are out there going, oh, how do I get started? How do I know who I should trust for information and things like that? And it's like people that have been through it, I'll never make that mistake again. And then people tell me all the time, they're like, well, I think the market's going to crash. It might, but if you set yourself up the right way, you can make money when the market's hot. You can make the money when the market's cold. It doesn't really matter. And the risk is dramatically mitigated if you can see what's coming. And really the only way to see what's coming is either have a mentor that's been through it or to have gone through it yourself. Going through that experience was priceless, even though it was very expensive and painful at the time.
Right. Yep. Another lesson you had to pay for.
That was an expensive lesson.
Yes. So how did you change your strategy after that? You said you went more into rentals instead of flipping. And did you do that back in Ohio?
Yeah. So I moved back to, my oldest son had some medical stuff when we were living in Phoenix. And so we moved back to Cleveland to be close to the Cleveland Clinic and Rainbow Babies and Children's Hospital and stuff like that. After the doctors in Phoenix basically said, hey, we don't really know how to help you. And so luckily, because we were moving so far away and it was work, we got a company to hire us and then relocate us to Cleveland. We were able to pick up a second mortgage because we had rented out the house. And so it was just, timing was great with how that worked out, even though the tenant bailed on us and whatnot. We were able to buy a house in Cleveland and all that kind of stuff. And then my wife and I ended up getting divorced. Just wasn't a good fit, bad bad relationship. And then, we had been through a lot of stuff with my son, and it just takes a toll on that kind of thing. So when we got divorced, I couldn't afford house payment. We were a single income family. And so I was paying a ton of money in alimony and child support, and with the mortgage payment and all that kind of stuff is what it was. I was like, man, I don't know what I can do. And even though we had lowballed the price of the house because we knew what was going on in Phoenix, we were like, well, I'm going to drop this price like 30, 40 grand. The market in Cleveland still dropped probably another 10 to 20,000 below where we bought at our house. So at that point, we weren't really upside down very much, but I was still going to have to write a check to get out of it. So I was like, well, maybe I'll just rent this. And so I took a stab at being a landlord again, and it worked out much better this time, and just kind of started putting the pieces back together again, not just in my investing world, but in my personal life and my family life and everything. I had gone through cancer when I was 30, and so it was like there's a whole really hitting rock bottom right around that time of, okay, now I got to figure it out how to make it happen again. It was good, and it was also really scary, and all that kind of stuff all happening at the same time. Best thing that ever happened to me, but also at the time it felt like it was the worst.
Wow. Yeah, no, that's a lot to go through. And yeah, the crash, personal issues, but you made it through, and that's impressive. How did you, so you rented that house. How did you keep kind of building and move into more rentals?
Well, so when we started I rented that house out, and then I actually turned into a renter myself because it just made sense with my financial situation and paying what I was paying for alimony and child support and all that kind of stuff. And I was still, on the same fixed income as a salaried employee that I was on before. And once I turned that house into a rental, and then I rented a house from a family friend who their mother had just died. And so the house was vacant, and it was in like a C-class neighborhood. And they said, hey, we know you're just kind of getting back on your feet. We don't want this house to sit vacant. So if you'd be cool with it, like, we'd let you live here for free for a few months until we sell it. And this way there's somebody here, people that are in the neighborhood see that somebody's living there, and, it's going to keep the copper intact. Like, nobody's going to break in and steal the appliances with a copper pipe and that kind of stuff. And I was like, wow, yeah, great. And I really understood the value for the very first time of the passive income, because I still was obviously paying the mortgage on the house that I had, but the rent was significantly more than what I was paying, and I didn't have any rent on the other side of it. So it was like I had this big swing all of a sudden of passive income that really helped not only pay my bills, but also kind of, get my feet set on the right path. And to me, that was, I can't thank that family enough for giving me that opportunity, because it really did help me out a ton. But it was also a big mindset shift, because I had read about it. You can read all kinds of stuff, but knowledge without action is useless. And me seeing it firsthand in my own real life of when I was sitting there going, man, I'm struggling. I don't know how I'm going to make all this work. And then all of a sudden it was this huge cash flow swing, and I really wasn't doing anything to get it. I went, okay, now I truly understand the value of the passive cash flow that comes from, the real estate investing. And at the time, all I knew was rentals, and now obviously I do a lot on the note side too. And it's like, man, this is where it's at. Obviously you're not hitting your home runs like you are in flipping houses, but you start to build up a little over time, and you start to stack those units, and the next thing you know, you've got a pretty nice chunk of money coming in without really a whole lot of effort on your side, which is a beautiful thing. And so going from, okay, I got this first rental, now what do I do, was I bounced around a little bit, and I ended up meeting my wife that I'm married to now at the gym. And I'd done a couple different construction projects, and so I decided to rent the place in like an A-B part of town that was like 0.6 of a mile from the project that I was going to be on, which is really like, if anybody that's listening that's been in construction or knows anybody that's ever been in construction, like, you live in one central spot, like wherever you live, and then the jobs just it's wherever the job is where you go. And so you might have a job that's 20 minutes from your house. You might have a job that's an hour and a half from your house. You never really know where the next project's going to be. And so to have the opportunity to get assigned to a job right around the time that I was moving anyway, to where I could pick my living location, and it was like right down the street from the job site, and I was going to be there for 2 years. Like, that's a construction manager's dream. And so I kind of settled in. I rented a condo and settled in, got a gym membership, and just started checking out the local stuff on that part of town, and ended up meeting my wife at the gym, which was cool. And so we started dating, and she's like, oh, where do you live? I'm like, I live over here, and it's in a condo, and I rent. And she's like, oh, you're renting? And I'm like, yeah. I said, but I own, I've got a house down here in this part of town, which is a really nice area. And I said, but it's a rental. And she's like, oh, tell me about that. She's like, I always wanted to get into rentals. And my ears kind of perked. I was like, really? And so we talked a lot about that when we were first dating. And she was like, yeah, when I bought this house, I always envisioned putting, somebody doing the work, not me, and making it nice, turning it into a rental, and then moving into something different. And it was like, wow, this is cool. Like, this is literally what I did. And so we had a lot to talk about and that kind of thing. And that's really what ended up happening. We got married, and I completely gutted that house, and it's still a rental in our portfolio today. And we ended up moving into a different house, and then together, my wife and I have built our portfolio. But we started out using hard money. That's kind of a long, circuitous path of getting that around to answering your question. But we started out using hard money. Me being a numbers guy, I could see the value in a hard money lender if you do it the right way. I mean, obviously people can get burned big time if they don't know what they're doing using hard money. But we did our first few deals with hard money lenders, and we both had really good credit at that time. I mean, I had recovered from the deed in lieu foreclosure from years before. So we were able to get it, buy a deal with hard money, rehab it, put tenants into it, and then, 6 months or so afterwards, we would go to the bank and refi the deal with a conventional loan. A lot of times pull equity out of it, so put more money back into our pockets, and then paid off the hard money person, and just, kind of kept around doing that path. And at the time, the government had the 4 property cap. Now they've redone it to where it's 10 now, which is awesome. But at the time, I could only have 4 loans, she could only have 4 loans, and we both had a mortgage on the primary residences that we had moved out of, and then my wife had done the title on our second home under hers. So she had 2 mortgages already, so she only could have 2 more before the government at the time cut her off and said, no, you can't do this anymore. So we had to get creative on, okay, now what do you, when you're both capped out and the government says we won't give you any more money, what do you do next? And so, you can either quit or you figure it out, right? So, but that's how we got started. We were basically flipping properties to ourselves using hard money.
Nice. No, that's a great strategy. And I've talked about that before, just being able to, whether it's hard money or private money, renovate, rent the property, get a long-term loan in place. It's a really great way to get into rentals without putting that 20 or 25% down that most people don't have. So it really is. And I ran that same problem with my properties, the 10 rule and 4 rule. And I found an amazing local lender who I work with now who has no limit on that. So that's kind of how I got around it. But how did you end up getting more loans?
Well, we've eventually gone that route too. So we do a lot of stuff these days with private lenders. We just bought 6 units last week, and we bought it with no money out of pocket, all private financed. And so we do a lot of stuff with private lenders. Same kind of strategy. The only difference is hard money is more expensive than private money, obviously. But we're still looking at the restructuring debt and paying off people whenever they want to get paid off. And we try to make it a win-win for our private lenders. But we started going commercial financing at first because we didn't have the local bank contacts and relationships at that point, and I really didn't know it even existed. And so I think the thing that really, there's no right, wrong. It's just you got to take action in one direction, and then someday you might realize, oh, I could have done this better or cheaper or faster. But it's like, yeah, but you did it. You did something, and that's what you had to do. So we got hooked up with some commercial lenders that would do like blanket loans, and so we could roll 5 or 6 properties into one commercial loan, and restructure the debt, and then go back and kind of hit the reset button on the personal side to where we could go back in and continue to do more deals and restructure them using conventional residential loans, and having this one blanket loan that we could add properties to or pull properties out of depending on what our needs were. And we started going down that route. Obviously, it's not as good. Rates and terms aren't as good on the commercial side as they are on the residential side. So having that private, not private, the local community bank relationship is huge because they can give you a lot of times residential rates and terms. And as long as the properties are cash flowing and you've got the debt service, which is easy to do for us here in the Midwest, they really don't care how many loans they give you as long as it's performing and you've got the reserves they want to see.
Yep, exactly. And speaking of that, how has the market been in Cleveland? Has it gone up at all lately?
We have seen it go up in certain parts of town. I mean, there are other parts of town that are still, rough areas that I don't personally go in or invest in or recommend that anybody goes into. But some of the really nice areas that you can really get nice returns in are starting to see steady increases to the point where it's harder and harder to get good deals as easy as it used to be. A couple of years ago, the prices were still a little low and the rents were still very high and stable. And it's always going to be a stable rental market here in Cleveland. It's just there's just such a big blue collar demographic that have grown up renters that will always be renters, and when I was a realtor, I'm not a realtor anymore, but when I was, that was one of the biggest ways I would get buyers. Is I would sit down with people and I would talk about where they want to rent and how much money they made, how much they were looking to spend on rent, and then just in these conversations you'd be like, well, you make a lot of money and you have a down payment. Why would you rent instead of buy? Oh, well, I didn't think I could qualify. Oh, well, let me get you pre-approved. Here's a contact for 3 lenders. Go get a pre-approval. Let me go help you buy a house instead. So I would flip renters to buyers all the time because it's just a mentality thing. They just don't think they can. But you have that mindset here in the Midwest. So it bodes well for landlords because there's just tons and tons of people that want to rent. But we're starting to steadily see some of these price points go up to the point where it's like, you got stuff that's on the market, that hits the MLS and you go, who's buying this? Unless you're going to buy it and live in one half and rent out the other as like a cash flowing personal residence, they're starting to price themselves out of the market a little bit. So, for investors, there's more value for the people that are out there really finding the deals, for sure.
Right. Yeah, no, we've seen the same thing here. And Colorado's gone crazy where I was buying rentals for $100,000, 3 years ago, 4 years ago, and now they're all over $200,000 for the same houses. So they don't cash flow anymore. It's the problem.
Dramatically different. I mean, I'm talking about places that, a couple of years ago were $65,000. Now they're $85,000.
Right.
So there's the difference, right?
Yep.
Yeah, we haven't seen double price points, but makes a difference especially when we first started out, when I was a realtor, I built my list, my buyer's list. I built my buyer's list as a realtor. So I was just flinging property as a real estate agent. So I would find deals on the MLS and I would just send them to a list and say, hey, who wants me to be your buyer's agent? Here's this awesome deal. And I would calculate ROI numbers and cash on cash returns and all that kind of stuff. And, people get really spoiled. And, I've got a lot of investors on my list that are like, well, man, I don't really want to invest in anything unless I can get, 15% or 18%. I'm sitting there going, most investors think that those numbers are like not even legit. Like when I send out a deal anymore and it's close to 20% return, they think it's in a bad part of town. It must be too risky because, nobody's out there really making those kinds of numbers. And we can get that here in decent areas with decent property, but people don't believe it. And it's just funny to me that I've got people that are so, I don't know what the right word is, but they're so conditioned to seeing those kinds of returns that now when I send out something and it's like 12, 13, 14% return, they go, yeah, I'm really going to hold out for something higher. It's like, okay. In the meantime, your money's sitting in the bank making 0.025%, but good strategy, sounds good.
Right. So take us back a little bit. I know we've gone on some circles in different places here, but how did you go from your career to full-time investing? What was that process like?
Well, it's kind of interesting because probably around the summer, beginning of 2015, we had started to stack enough units to where we saw like that we were getting quite a bit of money in passive income, and it was great. My wife was at the time she was an assistant manager at a cancer unit as a nurse, and she was making good money, and I was senior project manager in construction, and she was making great money, and I was making 2 times what she was making. So combined, our household income was really nice, probably 3 times the average of the neighborhood that we lived in Cleveland. So we had some leverage there, obviously, with our incomes to do deals and things of that nature. But probably around the summer when we bought a duplex, and at that point, we realized that our passive income had surpassed our normal monthly budget for expenses. And it was pretty awesome. And we knew that going into that deal. We said, hey, if this thing cash flows where we think it's going to be, this is like we're going to hit financial freedom. And we had never taken money out of the business. We had never pulled money out of the rental side and used it to pay bills or pay off things or whatever. We always just let the money roll, and we would just use it to buy more deals. At that point in time in the summer of 2015, I was like, you know what? We could literally quit both of our jobs, and the passive income could pay all of our bills, and we could literally do nothing if we wanted to. Now, neither one of us are wired that way. So, I think, and I'll get to this, but like at one point I did try that, and it lasted about a week. And then my wife was like, you got to go do something. Like, you're not going to sit on the couch forever. And you run out of things to do. And stuff that like when you're super busy, you think of all these things that you're missing out on. And then when you get just lots and lots of time to do all those things, you go, okay, this isn't as cool as I thought it was, or the novelty wears off really fast. But I guess so for me, to answer your question, around the summer of 2015 was when I was like, okay, I could really see myself doing this full time. And it's funny because you don't know what you don't know. And at the time, all I wanted to do was quit my job in construction, manage my rental portfolio, like be my own property manager, and just add more units. So I wanted to add more units. I wanted to be the manager of my own property, deal with my tenants, and place tenants and all that kind of stuff. And that was kind of this vision that I had. And we got a little frustrated in the fall of 2015 working with realtors because they don't have the speed that a lot of investors need. Plus, I don't think a lot of investors really truly understand how much they use and abuse agents too. So I think looking back on it, because once I got my real estate license, I did have some investors that really like ran me through the ringer. And I was like, oh, this is what I did to all of these other people. So you don't really realize it at the time. When you send a list of 15 properties, you're like, I want to offer on all 15 of these. Like, you think you're doing an agent a huge favor because you're going to buy stuff. And in the meantime, you get 2 of those and they've had to write up 13 offers that they didn't get. And, these are like ridiculous offers and they're going to make like $800 on a deal. So it's a huge waste of time for them, but you don't see that through your lens, right? So I decided I'm going to go get a real estate license. And I had already signed up to take classes full-time, nights and weekends right after New Year's. And when we hit that financial freedom number, when we got that last unit added in, and it was like, okay, we could literally quit, my attitude at work dramatically changed. And I wasn't the greatest employee to begin with because I always had ambitious visions and dreams that were way beyond what I was doing for somebody else. But at this point, it was like, I don't need this paycheck anymore. And I went from an okay employee to a really bad employee. And I started saying no a lot. And people don't like to hear employees say no. And so I didn't last a whole lot longer. And New Year's Eve of 2015, I was let go. And I remember driving home because I had about a 45-minute commute, and I was drive home, And I called my wife and I said, well, I was right, because I told her when I left for work that day. I said, because New Year's Eve was a Friday. I said, who in the world has people come into work on a Friday and it's New Year's Eve? And I said, you know what? I bet you they fire me today. And she's like, shut up. And I said, no, seriously. It's the last day of the year. If I come back on Tuesday, because Monday's the holiday because of New Year's, if I come back on Tuesday, now they got to pay me for next year, and I'll get a W-2 the following year. I'm like, if they were going to let me go, today's the day to do it. And I said, and I bet you I get there and there's not a soul in the office and I'm there just to be let go. Because the writing was kind of on the wall. It had been like this for months, and I had only worked there for about 6 months. They had recruited me, and it was just an awful fit from the get-go. I had made it very clear, like I was teaching classes. I was still teaching college at the time, and they had recruited me to take over for a guy that was going to retire in about a year. And the thing was, the guy hadn't expressed his desire to retire, and he had no desire to retire. So here they brought me in to basically replace this dude who wasn't leaving. So we ended up having a conversation soon after I got there where I was basically, for all intents and purposes, like, so when are you retiring? And he's like, I'm not retiring. And I'm like, oh, okay. And he goes, yeah, I was really surprised that they hired another senior PM because I really didn't feel like we needed somebody. And I said, well, and, me being just transparent, I'm like, well, I was told you were retiring. And he's like, really? It was like we sat across from the table at each other, and we both, like, the light bulb went off at the same time, where I was like, wow, they brought me in to replace this guy, and he doesn't know he's being replaced. He thought the same thing. Wow, they brought this guy in to replace me, and I'm not ready to retire. And so then it became his job to basically get rid of me, and he was the head of the division. So it was just this awful, contentious relationship from the get-go, and miserable work environment, to say the least. And so on my way home, I told my wife, I said, you know what, Amy? I said, I think I'm done. And she said, what do you mean? I said, I think I'm done in construction. I said, I've been a square peg in a round hole for, and this at this point was about 15 years or 16 years. And I said, I feel like enough's enough. We're to the point where we don't need the income. I mean, obviously the income's great, but we don't need it. Our rentals are paying all of our bills. I said, what if we, and I said, here's what we've been able to do with both of us working full-time jobs. And in construction, I mean, it's not a 40-hour work week. It's more like a 60, 65, 70-hour work week. And I said, what if I was able to focus on this full-time? And she's like, well, we really wanted to be in a different place financially. We wanted to have more saved, is really what she was getting at. And I said, you know what? The timing's right. I said, what if I switched my real estate classes to full-time instead of part-time? I'll crank them out in like 2 or 3 weeks. And if we need to, I could sell a house here or there. Like, this was totally me being naive of what it takes to really be a realtor, right? Of, if we need a couple extra bucks, I'll just go sell a house. Like deals just fall out of the sky for realtors. And so that's what we did. We made the decision that we would take the leap, and I would never go back to, being an employee in the construction industry, or at least we would give it a try. And that was really kind of how things ramped up for us. Was I took that leap and ultimately realized I really didn't need a real estate license. And I kind of came full circle to that later on. But I tried to make it as a realtor because I sold a house. I just kind of happenstance. I started buying Zillow leads, which are awful. But I did get a lead off of Zillow, and these people, like young couple, were looking at, the average house price in Cleveland's $150K. And these people were looking at like $600,000-$700,000 houses, and I'd gotten them off a Zillow lead. And I was like, oh my God, Zillow leads are like gold. I'm going to triple down on Zillow leads. And so I started spending like $1,500 a month on Zillow marketing. And and then I would realize like, wow, this commission would be what I used to make in a month in construction. Maybe there's more to being a realtor than I thought there was. Maybe I'll try to be a realtor and I'll just grow the portfolio through our real estate commissions and do it that way, which was funny. And then ultimately realized I really didn't like being a real estate agent, and it's a grind. So I decided, you know what, I'll grow a team. I'll build a team. And so I tried that for a while, and then ultimately ended up circling back to investing. And the thing is, like, for anybody listening in the now or in the future, like, it's so important to understand your purpose and your why. Because if I had had that clearer in my head, then all of these things that were like the shiny object syndrome, shiny penny that had come across my path, I would have been like, nope, my main focus is this, and this is why I'm doing it. And so every time there was an opportunity, I was like, yeah, let's try it. It was a lot of changing directions. It was a lot of spinning of the wheels. We survived the first year of the foray as a real estate entrepreneur, as I would call it, to the point where I'm no longer licensed. I gave that up, and now we run our real estate firm here in Cleveland. We have a team, and we're just 100% investments, and we predominantly at this point just are looking to grow our real estate portfolio, which is exactly what I wanted to do 2.5 years ago when I sat at my desk as a construction manager and was like, someday I just want to grow my real estate portfolio. So here I am back in that same boat, but we've had a ton of experiences, some wins and losses along the way, but I think you go through that to better understand who you are, what you really truly want, to make informed decisions, because you can't make informed decisions without the practical application side.
Right. No, that's a crazy story too. And I've been an agent for many years, and like part of it, did not like part of it. The part that really was good for me was when I was listing REOs and foreclosures for banks, where we had systems and I wasn't dealing with emotions and people. And besides that, I let my team sell houses and I stay away from it. I focus on the investing.
Well, and that's what I had started to do. And then, we started doing some wholesaling stuff in Ohio. It's a very anti-wholesaling state. And you got to be very careful as to how you do it. We got a lot of lawyers involved to make sure that we were doing it the right way. I mean, we always wanted to be above board, make sure that we weren't going to ever get ourselves in a bad situation, or, being a licensed agent, we wanted to make sure we weren't getting our broker involved or in trouble. And we've always tried to be above board. But eventually, when we got out of the wholesaling, like in the pure sense of wholesaling, it was like, you know what, we're not even using this real estate license. So I'm paying to maintain it, and there's all this fiduciary responsibility. And I was like, let's just get rid of it because it's not worth it. And at the end of the day, we're really not making our money wholesaling. We're making our money. I mean, in essence, we wholesale to ourselves, but there's nothing wrong or illegal about that. So, that made the right move. That was the right move for us at that time.
Nice. Well, Matt, we've talked about a lot of different things. Really cool hearing your story. I know you're doing some other stuff right now. What's your focus right now as far as, I know you're still trying to build the cash flow, but you've got your own podcast, some other things going on. So tell us about that.
Yeah, so I've got a real estate podcast called The Cash Flow King. It's predominantly about, passive residual income. We do talk about other stuff too on there. When we've had a couple guests, we're going to try to ramp up the guests on there. And so we should have you come on the show and talk about what you do too. But so we've got the Cash Flow King podcast. We're starting a new podcast that is just launching here in the next couple of weeks. We're getting everything. We're starting to do preliminary interviews before we launch it on iTunes and stuff. So I don't want to tell too much about it, but it's going to be more entrepreneurial focused. So it's not specific to real estate in general. It's more just a general entrepreneur podcast, which I think is going to be cool. And it's going to be 100% interview based, which I think will be fun. And it'll give, I've got a lot of friends that are in the entrepreneur space. So it'll give them the ability to kind of, showcase what they do. And I think there's a really cool, the niche is really going to be kind of on mindset. So it's going to be on this, what does it take to be successful in the entrepreneur space? What do you need to do if you're starting out and all that kind of stuff. So we've got that coming out. I got a couple best-selling books. One's Man on Fire. You can get it at manonfirebook.com. We give it for free. Just ask you to pay a couple bucks for shipping. We send it to you. It's kind of my story. A lot of the parts and pieces will sound familiar if you read the book for what we just talked about today. But it does talk a lot about the transition from me being a full-time employee using real estate to be able to, live my lifestyle the way I want to set it up and all that kind of stuff. And so that's on there, manonfirebook.com. And then we're working on a new project we're going to call the REI Playbook, which is going to be kind of a collection of other investors, and it's going to be interview-based and really kind of we're going to break it down into categories. So like part 1 is going to be wholesaling, part 2 is going to be flipping, part 3 is going to be note investing, and we'll just go through and then have collections. Each person, each author will be a real estate entrepreneur doing what they do and be able to tell their story as to here's some of the tricks and tips that I use to grow my business and be successful. So hopefully we've got that coming out, I would say first quarter of next year at this point. Probably takes, 2 or 3 months to put that project together and published. So that's something to keep an eye out for. And I'm trying to think. And really other than that, I mean, we're always doing deals. We closed 3 deals last week, added 6 more units. We got 4 deals on the board that we're closing this week. And we do it all with, really for the most part, we do it all with private lenders. So we're working on putting together a fund. But until then, it's just one-off people that contact us and say, hey, I want to get into real estate investing, but I don't really want to be a landlord. And we're like, great, we'll take your money, we'll secure it with the real estate, we'll pay you a great return. It's a win-win for everybody and take deals down that way. So it's been a really nice fit helps us grow the portfolio, and it helps other people win from the standpoint that a lot of these people that we're attracting are people that were just like me. They have jobs. They are doing full-time. They've got money. They don't really have time to be active investors in the rental side, but they can park, 40, 50, 60K, 100K, 200K with us. And, we can pay them, whatever the deal yields. And typically it's anywhere from, we've been paying anywhere from 8 to 15% recently on deals. And so it's a huge win for them. It helps to grow their cash flow. And then we've even had some people that had really nice connections that have started to raise money on their end to just basically lend to us on our end. They make the spread, and we've had 5 people so far this year be able to quit work while either doing deals with us, being active investors, or as note investors. So it's really exciting. We threw out a number just recently. We said, I want to help 100,000 people fire their boss forever. And it's a big number, and I have no idea how that's going to work yet or what I need to do to make that goal happen. But so far we're at 5, and we'll get there. But it's exciting. It's exciting to be able to say this person had no idea how they were going to make that transition happen. They knew they wanted it, and we got involved, and they were able to put a plan in place and work the plan to the point where they were able to quit and, move, and if they wanted to, do their own thing now. And it's really exciting to be a part of that. And at the end of the day, I think most entrepreneurs would care more about contribution than they care about like income, right? Being able to be part of that for somebody else is so rewarding. It's been exciting.
Nice. Well, Matt, thank you so much for being on the show. I think that's all I had to go over. Anything else you want to add before we head out of here?
Nope. I appreciate you having me on the show. It's been awesome.
Cool. No, thank you. I learned a lot. You've been through quite a bit yourself, and it's great to see you learn, like you said, and have some expensive lessons, but they still helped you move forward in life and keep going. So yeah, thank you so much for being on the show. And we'll definitely have to keep in touch, and I'd love to be on your podcast too.
Oh, for sure. Yeah, we'll definitely set that up.
All right. Have a great rest of your week here, and we'll be in touch.
Awesome. Thank you.